The Insomniac leak is massive, and while it's an absolute disaster and tragedy for the company and those who work there, it's out in the wild now, so I thought I'd discuss one of the more interesting aspects of the leak, and that regards AA games versus AAA games. It feels like Sony has been very focused on the large and expensive AAA titles and has been overlooking the opportunity of smaller and more budget-minded titles. However, in one of the slide presentations that came from the Insomniac leak, we can see that they have presented Sony with some interesting information circa early 2022. As a side note, I'm not going to show the actual slides even though they can be found all over the internet. I did some basic searching on YouTube and no one else seems to have them up, so I'm going to follow suit in this case. In one of the slides we can see they talk about how one AAA game can fund up to 3 mid-sized titles, and the development time for one such AAA game is comparable to developing 2 mid-sized games back-to-back, which from this point I'll continue to refer to this as a AA title. In their reckoning, they figured that they could make 2 AA games in the same amount of time as a AAA title, while spending a whopping $100 million less. And they conclude that the prospect of spending $300 million on 3 mid-sized games versus 1 AAA is very intriguing. I'd say it's downright compelling. Game budgets have absolutely spiraled out of control in the last few years, and it seems to be existing in some sort of beyond unsustainable bubble. In another slide, we can see some hard statistics as well as a potential forecast with these considerations in mind. Whereas Spider-Man 2 costs roughly $270 to $300 million, something smaller like Miles Morales was closer to $90 million with a much higher ROI. Obviously, something like Miles Morales couldn't have existed without first developing Spider-Man, so that's something that has to be considered. If you go back to the 90s or so, this was not an uncommon practice to release long-forgotten things called expansion packs. These would be most closely related to modern-day DLC as it is known. The games would launch, and then sometime subsequent to that, the expansion would launch at varying prices, sometimes as low as $19.99 because the vast majority of assets would be reused in the expansion. That's not to say that new assets weren't added, but a lot of times these expansions built upon what already existed, but would add new levels, areas, enemies, and so forth. But regardless, it should be obvious how that can be a cost-saving mechanism while still providing more content. Some notable examples of this are Jedi Knight's expansion, Mysteries of the Sith, or Morrowind's Tribunal and Blood Moon. Obviously there are some differences between PC expansion packs of old and something like Miles Morales. The primary one being that something like Miles Morales reuses those assets, but doesn't require the customer purchase the original Spider-Man game. I would imagine this is a boon as far as the developer would be concerned, as having to own the original title could be viewed as a barrier to purchase of the expansion title. The bottom line is that developers reused assets that made sense while adding in new content around that in order to provide more adventure in the same world or under similar context, and therefore the cost of this venture should be significantly less. In general, though, I'd prefer these products be closer in lineage to a full-fledged expansion pack and less like a small DLC. When the player experiences a fully fledged world with good lore and setting, why wouldn't they want to return for another adventure, if not in the same world, a similar one, or a tale beyond the original plotline offered like we used to get? This seems to be what Insomniac is making reference to with these slides, and I'd really love to see more titles like this. While I still enjoyed Spider-Man more than Miles Morales as a game, Miles was also priced at only $49.99. I think it hasn't made sense for a long time, and that most games shoot for the top pricing tier, and it would be great to see a variety of games in the $40 to $70 range, all offering different experiences, and I think titles like Miles could provide that. I'm not suggesting that Sony stop releasing large AAA blockbusters, far from it. I love them as much as anyone else for the roller coaster that they are. But I would love to see a shift in focus to also provide smaller, tighter AA experiences with similar polish in between those titles or alongside them in some cases. So long as they are a full product in and of themselves, mind you. If you look at Insomniac's product roadmap, which again I'm not going to show, but I've made a smaller homemade version of it for your viewing pleasure, that focuses on the area I want to highlight. It does appear that they plan to fully engage in this workflow, as can be shown with the Venom title landing in between Spider-Man 2 and the Wolverine launch. This Venom title is said to be similar to Miles Morales in terms of scope. Again, this isn't proof, but hopefully it is an indication that we could see more titles like this from Sony. I would also like to see products like this from Nintendo, particularly when I think about the Zelda and Metroid franchises. I love 3D Zelda and really enjoy Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I really miss the 2D Zeldas and Metroids as well. Metroid Dread is a great example of this philosophy, and I hope we continue to get 2D Metroid titles, along with any future Metroid Prime style titles. Zelda, however, has gone a lot longer without a proper 2D entry. While one may consider Link's Awakening Remake on the Switch an example, and I'd give you that, I'm really talking about original titles. As much as I loved the Link's Awakening remake and hope to see the original Legend of Zelda redone in a similar fashion, the last real and original 2D Zelda we got was in 2013's Link Between Worlds, which I loved. And even that was originally supposed to be a remake of Link to the Past. Suffice to say, I hope we see more of this strategy from all contenders moving forward, and we'll just have to see what the future holds. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, drop your thoughts in the comments, or subscribe to the channel for all sorts of gaming videos in the future. Until then.